Alien Lord mockingly offered his disabled daughter, until a human saw her strength and hope. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The grand hall of Lord Cravar's palace was cold and uninviting. The walls shimmered with an unnatural violet light, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. At the center of the room, Lord Cravar, a towering figure with glimmering emerald skin, stood proudly. His regal, armored form was the epitome of power in his domain. He ruled over his vast empire with an iron fist, but today, his eyes held a spark of amusement as he observed the scene before him. In front of him, his daughter, Ilana, sat in a chair, her head bowed. Her violet eyes, usually filled with fire, now held nothing but sorrow. Her once graceful form was now crippled. An accident during a diplomatic mission had left her paralyzed from the waist down. She had become a mockery in her father's eyes, a symbol of weakness in a family known for strength. Lord Cravar had already made up his mind. To him, Ilana was no longer the fierce warrior he had once hoped to train. Her condition made her a liability, a burden on his honor. He had no use for her. "You are nothing more than a disappointment," he sneered, his voice cold. "You were supposed to be a leader, but now you are a useless cripple. The Empire does not need someone like you." Ilana's heart sank as her father's words cut deeper than any blade. She had tried to prove herself, tried to show him that despite her injury, she could still be of value. But every time she tried, he only reminded her of her failure. Her dreams of being a warrior like her ancestors were shattered, and she was left to endure the cold stares of those who once respected her. But just as her father prepared to make a final decision about her fate, a figure stepped forward. A human, a simple man, out of place in this alien palace. But there was something about him that caught Ilana's attention. His name was Jackson, a soldier from Earth, sent to assist in the diplomatic mission. Jackson had heard the stories of Lord Cravar's empire, but it wasn't the grandeur of the palace or the fearsome reputation of its ruler that had brought him here. It was the kindness in his heart. He had seen Ilana once, from a distance, and something about her struck him deeply. The way she sat there, defeated yet still proud. The way she held herself, despite the cruel words of her father. Jackson wasn't sure what he could do for her, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just stand by and watch this alien lord strip away her dignity. Without a second thought, Jackson approached Lord Cravar and spoke with quiet but firm resolve. "Lord Cravar, I don't know your customs, but I do know this. Your daughter is not a disappointment. She has more strength in her than most warriors I've met. If you won't see that, then perhaps it's time someone else did." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Lord Cravar's face turned dark with fury. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a human. His eyes narrowed, but Jackson stood his ground, unwavering. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he would not back down. Ilana looked up at the human, surprise flickering in her eyes. She had never imagined that a human would come to her defense, let alone speak up to her father in such a way. Her heart stirred with a mix of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and, for the first time in a long while, hope. But Lord Cravar's anger was palpable, his voice dripping with disdain as he spoke. "And what would a lowly human know about honor? You have no place here." But Jackson's gaze never faltered. "I know enough to see when someone is being mistreated. Your daughter deserves better than this. She deserves a chance to prove her worth." The words seemed to hit Lord Cravar harder than he expected. His eyes flashed with something. Doubt, perhaps, or the smallest flicker of recognition. But it was fleeting. He turned sharply, dismissing Jackson with a wave of his hand. "Enough. You are wasting my time." But Jackson's words had already planted a seed. Something had shifted. Ilana's world, which had once been defined by her father's harsh judgments, had just cracked open. In that moment, she realized that there were those who saw her for who she truly was, not a cripple, but a warrior at heart. She wasn't alone anymore. Jackson had given her more than just a moment of kindness. He had given her the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, She could still be more than what her father had declared her to be. And that was just the beginning. As the tension in the room thickened, Lord Cravar stood, his eyes burning with anger, staring at Jackson, the human who had dared to challenge him in his own palace. Ilana's heart raced as she watched the interaction, the unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had stood up for her. Someone had seen her for what she truly was, not just a crippled girl. But the moment passed quickly, and the harsh reality of her father's rules settled back into the room like a cold, suffocating fog. Lord Cravar took a deep breath, his posture straightening as he regained his composure. "You should leave now, human. You have overstepped your bounds," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Jackson didn't flinch. He stood his ground, staring back at the alien lord with unwavering resolve. "I will leave when I know that you understand what you've just done," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Your daughter deserves better than this. You're too blinded by your own pride to see it." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the stern facade of Lord Cravar cracked. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, the smallest hint of vulnerability that he quickly masked. But Ilana saw it. She saw her father's weakness, and for the first time in her life, she felt something stir inside her. She wasn't just a pawn in his game. She was a person with strength. And for that, she owed Jackson everything. The silence that followed was deafening. It felt like the entire universe had paused, waiting for Lord Cravar's response. Finally, the alien lord spoke again, his voice cold but begrudgingly respectful. "Leave," he commanded. "But remember this, human, if you speak again on this matter, it will not end well for you." Jackson nodded, his expression resolute, but he didn't respond. He simply turned and began walking away, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Ilana watched him go, a strange feeling of warmth blossoming in her chest. He had done something no one else had done for her. He had treated her like a person, not a burden. But the moment didn't last long. As Jackson left the hall, Lord Cravar turned to his daughter, his expression unreadable. "You're lucky that humans showed you some mercy," he spat. "You will never amount to anything if you continue to show weakness like this." Ilana's heart sank. Her father's words were as cruel as ever. But they didn't sting as much as they used to. Because now, she knew she wasn't alone. She wasn't defined by his hatred or his expectations. She was stronger than he realized. And that strength, her strength, had just begun to emerge. In the days that followed, Ilana found herself thinking about Jackson's words. What had made him speak up for her? What had he seen in her that no one else had? The answers didn't come easily, but something inside her began to shift. She started to see herself differently. She no longer saw her disability as a curse, but as a challenge, something to overcome. Every morning, she practiced. Every moment she spent in her wheelchair, she used it to her advantage, strengthening the muscles in her arms, building endurance. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. And every time she thought about Jackson's kindness, she pushed herself harder. Days turned into weeks, and Ilana's physical strength began to return. It was slow, but it was real. She could move her legs a little more, stand a little longer. And each day, as her body grew stronger, so did her spirit. She no longer feared her father's judgment. But she didn't know if she could ever make him see her for who she truly was. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Ilana was resting by the palace's grand balcony, looking out over the empire she was supposed to rule one day. Her thoughts wandered back to Jackson, and she couldn't help but wonder if he would ever come back. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie, and when she turned, she saw her father standing in the doorway, his face as stern as ever. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Ilana," he began, his voice harsh, but there was something different about the way he said her name. "But you will never be a warrior. Your place is here, in this palace, under my rule." Ilana stood up slowly, her legs still unsteady, but she was determined. "Maybe I don't want to be a warrior under your rule anymore," she said, her voice steady. "Maybe I want to prove that I can be more than you ever imagined." Her words hung in the air between them, defiant and bold. Lord Cravar's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You are a fool if you think you can defy me." But Ilana didn't back down. "I don't need your approval anymore," she replied, her voice strong. "I'm going to fight for my own future." Her father stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. There was no doubt in his eyes now. He saw her strength. But whether that was enough to change anything, only time would tell. Days passed, and the once cold and distant palace began to feel a little less intimidating to Ilana. The weight of her father's judgment still loomed over her, but it no longer held the same power over her heart. Every day, she pushed herself harder, practicing in the quiet of the palace gardens, her arms growing stronger, her resolve even more unshakable. Her father, Lord Cravar, continued to watch her with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. He couldn't understand what had changed in her, why she was suddenly so determined to prove herself. To him, she was a broken child, unfit for the demands of their empire. Yet, Ilana no longer cared about his approval. She no longer sought his validation. What mattered now was her own journey, her own sense of purpose. One morning, as Ilana was practicing in the garden, Jackson appeared at the palace gates once again, his tall, muscular figure standing out among the guards. He had returned, as if drawn back to her by some unseen force. Ilana's heart fluttered as she watched him approach, her breath catching in her throat. Jackson had been the spark that had ignited the fire within her, and now, seeing him once again, her strength only grew. He had treated her like a person, not a burden, and for that, she would forever be grateful. As Jackson entered the garden, their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. She didn't need to speak. He could see the difference in her, the new confidence that radiated from her every movement. Jackson gave her a small, approving smile. "You've come a long way, Ilana," he said, his voice warm, filled with respect. Ilana nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. "I have," she replied, her voice steady. "And I'm just getting started." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her dreams weren't impossible. They could be realized. They would be. Jackson stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Your father still refuses to see it, doesn't he?" he asked, his tone thoughtful. Ilana lowered her head slightly, but her eyes remained focused. "He's too blind to see what I've become," she said softly. "But that's not going to stop me." Jackson studied her for a moment before nodding. "You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, Ilana," he said, his words filled with certainty. "But you need to show him. You need to show the world who you truly are." Her heart surged with determination at his words. She had already begun to do that, in her own way. She had already shown herself. But now, it was time to show her father. It was time to take the final step, to break free from the chains of his expectations. "How do I do that?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity and challenge. Jackson gave her a knowing smile. "You fight," he said simply. "You fight for what you believe in, for who you are. You fight not just for yourself, but for the future you want to create." The simplicity of his words was powerful, and Ilana knew he was right. She didn't need to seek permission. She didn't need her father's approval. She needed to forge her own path, to create her own destiny. "I'll fight," she said with conviction, her eyes burning with a new fire. "I will fight for the person I've become, and for the person I'm going to be." Jackson's smile widened, pride shining in his eyes. "I knew you had it in you," he said. "The world is about to see the true strength of Ilana." And so, with the support of Jackson and her newfound resolve, Ilana prepared for the final test. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Her father would resist her every step of the way, but she no longer feared him. She no longer feared anything. The battle that awaited her wasn't just physical. It was about claiming her place in the world, about proving that her strength, her will, and her heart were more than enough to carve out a future for herself. The journey was just beginning, and Ilana was ready. She was ready to show the world that no one, not even her own father, could define her fate. She would fight, and she would win. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. Ilana stood before the grand entrance to the palace, the place that had once been her prison, her father's kingdom looming over her like a shadow. Her heart raced, but this time it was not from fear. It was from the fierce, undeniable strength that had been growing inside her for weeks. Her training, her struggle, and the support of Jackson had brought her here, to this very moment. Today, she would prove to the world, and to her father, that she was more than the crippled girl he had once discarded. Today, she would show him her true strength. As she entered the palace, the cold marble floors beneath her feet felt different. They no longer felt like barriers. They felt like the foundation of her future. Her father, Lord Cravar sat at his throne, his imposing figure a stark contrast to the quiet resolve in Ilana's eyes. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "What do you think you're doing, Ilana?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're still nothing more than a crippled child. Your place is not here." Ilana took a deep breath, her chest rising with the weight of her words. She had heard his taunts for so long, but today was different. Today, she was ready to fight back, not with anger, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally found their worth. "You're wrong, father," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not a cripple. I'm a warrior, and I will prove it." The words hung in the air, defying the very authority that had once defined her life. Lord Cravar's expression faltered for a moment, the barest flicker of doubt crossing his face before he quickly masked it. He rose from his throne, his eyes narrowing with contempt. "A warrior? You're nothing but a broken toy," he growled. "You'll never be fit to rule. You're weak, and that weakness will be your downfall." Ilana stood tall, her gaze locked with his, her body still trembling with the intensity of her emotions. But this time, it wasn't fear that made her shake. It was the fire of determination. "I am not weak, and I will not let your words define me any longer," she said firmly. Her father's eyes burned with anger, but something in Ilana's stance, in the strength that radiated from her, made him hesitate. For a brief moment, he saw her not as a broken daughter, but as something more, a force to be reckoned with. "You may be strong, but you will never be the leader I wanted," he spat. "Your strength won't be enough to take my place." Ilana's heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the adrenaline of knowing she was standing up for herself for the first time in her life. "I don't want to take your place," she replied, her voice calm but fierce. "I want to create my own." Her father scoffed at the notion, but Ilana wasn't done. "I'm not here to follow your path. I'm here to make my own." As Ilana spoke, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, the palace guards, the servants, the nobles, all watching, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. They had all heard the stories of Lord Cravar's ruthless rule, but now they were seeing his daughter stand up to him, unafraid. Lord Cravar clenched his fists, his face twisted in fury, but something else flickered in his eyes now, something he couldn't quite hide. Was it fear? Was it respect? He turned away from her, as if to dismiss her words, but Ilana wasn't finished. "You may have the power, but you don't have the heart," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "And that is why I will be the one who changes this empire. I will lead it with compassion, strength, and courage, everything you've never taught me." Lord Cravar's face darkened, his jaw tight. He looked like he wanted to strike her, to silence her, but for the first time in his life, he was uncertain. Ilana stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I won't fight you with violence," she said, her voice steady. "I'll fight you with the truth. The truth that you've never seen me for who I truly am. But now, I'm going to show you." And with that, Ilana turned and walked away, leaving her father standing in the center of the room, his empire, his throne, his entire legacy suddenly trembling under the weight of her words. As Ilana made her way through the palace, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The battle was not won yet, but it had begun. She had taken the first step, and nothing could stop her now. She was no longer the girl who had been defined by her father's cruelty. She was no longer a prisoner in her own home. She was Ilana, a warrior in her own right, and she was ready to lead. The days following Ilana's declaration were filled with tension, but also a sense of anticipation that she had never experienced before. She moved with purpose throughout the palace, no longer shrinking away from the cold stares of the servants or the sneers of the nobles who once held her father in the highest regard. Lord Cravar's grip on the empire was formidable, but his daughter's words had shaken him, and Ilana knew it. She had begun the journey to redefine herself, and that was only the beginning. As the days passed, she trained harder, more focused than ever before. The palace, once a place of confinement, now felt like her battleground, a place where she could sharpen her skills and her mind. Every morning, she worked on strengthening her legs, pushing through the physical pain with an iron will. She could feel her body changing, growing stronger, more agile. She was no longer just training to move again. She was training to become the leader she knew she could be. One morning, as Ilana practiced in the palace's courtyard, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Jackson, who had become her unwavering ally, walked toward her. The sight of him brought a surge of gratitude and respect. Jackson had believed in her from the beginning, and now, more than ever, she realized how much his faith had meant. As he approached, she stopped and smiled, wiping the sweat from her brow. "You've been busy," Jackson said, his eyes scanning her form. "I can see the difference." Ilana nodded, catching her breath. "I've been working hard, but it's not just about strength anymore. It's about proving to myself that I'm more than what my father thinks I am." Jackson gave her a proud smile. "You're not just more than what he thinks you are. You're more than anyone ever gave you credit for." Ilana felt a warmth spread through her at his words. His belief in her had always been a constant source of strength, and now it fueled her determination. "I'm not going to let him keep me in his shadow," she said, her voice firm. "I'm going to show everyone, that I am capable of leading this empire." Jackson's expression turned serious. "You know that won't be easy, right? Your father won't just hand over control. He'll fight you every step of the way." Ilana met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm ready for that. I won't back down, not now, not ever." Jackson nodded, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "Then I'll be right beside you, every step of the way." The weight of his words settled over her like a shield, reinforcing her resolve. She was not alone in this fight. Together, they could face anything. The following week, as tensions between Ilana and her father continued to rise, Lord Kravar called for a grand assembly of his advisors and the empire's military leaders. The meeting was to take place in the Great Hall, the heart of his power, and Ilana knew this was her moment. She had to face her father, not just as his daughter, but as a leader in her own right. She would make him see her, truly see her, as the warrior and ruler she was becoming. When the day of the assembly arrived, Ilana entered the grand hall with the quiet confidence she had built over the last few weeks. Every step she took was measured, her posture straight, her eyes locked ahead. The room fell silent as she entered, all eyes turning toward her. Her father was seated at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his eyes told a different story. He was not prepared for this confrontation, not in the way that Ilana had prepared herself. As she walked toward the center of the room, the advisors whispered among themselves, exchanging confused glances. Ilana ignored them, focusing only on her father. When she reached the center of the room, she turned to face him, her heart beating loudly in her chest. "Father," she began, her voice carrying across the room, "I've come to speak the truth that you've been too blind to see." Lord Kravar's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Ilana continued, her words clear and unwavering. "I am not the weakling you think I am. I am not your failure. I have the strength to lead, to protect, and to bring this empire into a new era. And I will do so, whether you support me or not." The room was dead silent. Ilana's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth and defiance. Her father's gaze never left hers, but his silence was telling. He had expected her to break, to submit to him once again, but she stood tall, unyielding. "You think you can lead, Ilana?" He finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "You think you can rule this empire better than I have? You are a child, and you will always be beneath me." Ilana met his gaze head-on. "I don't need your approval to be a leader," she said firmly. "I've already started leading, and the people are beginning to see it." Her father's eyes narrowed, his pride wounded by her defiance. "You will never have the respect you think you deserve," he spat. "You are nothing without me." Ilana took a deep breath, the fire within her growing stronger with every word he spoke. "I am everything because I have learned to stand on my own," she said, her voice steady. "And you can no longer control me." With those final words, Ilana turned and walked out of the room, leaving her father speechless, his empire shaken by her courage and conviction. She had taken another step toward the future she had always known she could create. A future where she, not her father, would lead. The tension in the palace was palpable in the days following Ilana's bold declaration in the Great Hall. Word of her defiance spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of the nobles, the military leaders, and the people alike. Some whispered of her strength, her courage, while others doubted her ability to truly lead. But one thing was certain, Ilana had ignited something that could not easily be extinguished. She was no longer the broken daughter of Lord Cravar. She was a force to be reckoned with. In the following days, Ilana continued her training, but now it was different. The stakes had risen. She no longer merely trained to walk again or to prove herself to her father. She was training to lead, to guide her people to a better future. Her mind sharpened as she studied the intricacies of governance and leadership, listening to the counsel of those who supported her. Jackson remained by her side, offering advice and strength, always reminding her of the power she possessed within herself. Your father may control this palace, but you control your destiny, Jackson often said, and those words became Ilana's mantra. As she prepared for the next phase of her plan, she knew she would have to confront her father once more. This time, however, it would not be with words alone. She needed to show him, once and for all, that she had what it took to lead this empire. Ilana had gathered a small group of loyal supporters, many of whom had been disillusioned by Lord Cravar's rule, and they believed in her vision for the future. These allies, though few in number, were fierce and dedicated to the cause. They had seen the way Ilana had transformed, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. They knew she was ready to take her place as the true leader of the empire. The day of the confrontation arrived, and this time, it would be different. Ilana walked into the grand hall with a calm, steady confidence. She no longer sought her father's approval. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. She was a leader in her own right. Lord Cravar sat at his throne, his gaze cold and calculating, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew this moment had come. Ilana, he said, his voice tight with anger. You think you can challenge me? You are nothing without my empire. Ilana met his gaze without flinching, her voice unwavering as she spoke. I am everything because I have the strength to stand on my own. I don't need your empire. Father, I am building something better. The words were like a slap in the face, and for a moment, Lord Cravar's expression faltered. His empire, his legacy, was everything to him, and hearing his own daughter renounce it was a blow he hadn't prepared for. You're a fool if you think the people will follow you, he spat, his face twisted with rage. You think they'll abandon me, their true ruler, for a weak, crippled girl? Ilana's eyes burned with determination as she stepped closer, her voice steady but full of conviction. The people are already following me, she said, her tone resolute. They want change. They want a future that's not defined by fear, by oppression, and I will give them that future. For the first time, Lord Cravar hesitated. His anger was still there, but the doubt in his eyes deepened. Ilana had struck a nerve. He had always seen himself as invincible, but now, his own daughter was threatening the very foundation of his power. The air in the room was thick with tension, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. Ilana's allies, who had been quietly waiting outside the hall, knew this moment would determine everything. If Ilana could convince her father to relinquish control peacefully, they would have won the empire without bloodshed. But if not, they would have to fight. Ilana's voice rang out again, firm and clear. This is not a battle for power, father. This is a battle for the soul of our people. The empire belongs to them, not to you, not to me. It belongs to the people who will shape its future, not the ones who cling to the past. Lord Cravar's eyes flashed with fury, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out, but then he paused. The room held its breath. The air was thick with the weight of his decision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lord Cravar spoke, his voice cold but with a hint of finality. I will not surrender my throne to you, Ilana, he said, but I will not fight you either. The words were a surprise to everyone in the room. Ilana had expected resistance, expected a battle, but her father's admission left her speechless for a moment. What do you mean? She asked, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. I mean, Lord Cravar began, his voice weary, that the time has come for a change. I am no longer the ruler. This empire needs. But I will not leave without ensuring that you are ready to take my place. You may not have my throne, Ilana, but you will have my blessing. Ilana stood frozen, her heart racing as she processed his words. The throne, the empire, everything she had fought for, it was finally within her grasp. But the realization came with a weight that she hadn't expected. Her father had stepped down, but it wasn't a victory she could celebrate without understanding the cost. She had won, but the journey was far from over. Thank you, father, she said quietly, her voice full of respect. And with that, Ilana stepped forward, her eyes set on the future, knowing that the real challenge was just beginning. The days that followed Lord Cravar's unexpected decision were filled with a mix of uncertainty and excitement. Ilana had done the impossible. She had taken the first step toward becoming the ruler of the empire, but the weight of her new role was far heavier than she had anticipated. As her father's withdrawal left a vacuum of power, Ilana found herself standing on the precipice of a future she had once only dreamed of, and the burden of leadership pressed down on her. She spent the next few days in deep consultation with her allies, reviewing the empire's structure, learning about the challenges ahead, and gathering the support she would need to solidify her rule. Jackson, ever by her side, stood as a steadfast advisor and confidant. "This is your moment," he said one evening as they walked through the quiet corridors of the palace. "But it's not just about claiming power. It's about showing them why you're worthy of it." Ilana nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had spent years being told she was unworthy, weak, and incapable. Now that she had her father's blessing, it was time to prove to the empire, and to herself, that she was more than just a symbol of defiance. "I've spent so long thinking I had to be something my father wanted," Ilana confessed, her voice soft but resolute. "But now, I know I have to be something the people need." Jackson smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Exactly. You're not just a leader because of birthright or blood. You're a leader because of what you can offer, what you can change." The weight of his words was not lost on her, and as she prepared for the coming days, she knew Jackson was right. She had to do more than just take the throne. She had to earn it in the eyes of the people. As she moved forward with her plans, Ilana began to meet with the leaders of various factions within the empire, some of whom had supported her father, and others who had long hoped for a change. It was clear that Lord Cravar's reign had left its mark, divisions ran deep, and the people were divided in their loyalty. Some were eager to see the old ways abandoned, while others were fiercely loyal to the empire's past. This is not going to be easy, Ilana thought as she prepared for her first public address as the de facto ruler of the empire. But I cannot let fear hold me back now. The grand hall was filled with dignitaries, military leaders, and advisors as Ilana walked in, her steps steady, her gaze clear. The room fell silent as she approached the center of the hall, all eyes on her. Her father's former allies stared at her with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and grudging respect. Ilana could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't falter. This was her moment, and she would not squander it. When she spoke, her voice rang out clear and strong, filling the hall with authority. "I stand before you today not as the daughter of Lord Cravar, but as the leader of this empire. I will not hide behind my father's name or legacy. I will forge my own path." The silence in the room was heavy, but Ilana pressed on. "I know that the road ahead will be difficult, and there will be those who oppose us, but I promise you this. I will lead with compassion, with strength, and with a commitment to the people. Together, we will build an empire that thrives not on fear, but on unity." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. But then, slowly, a murmur spread through the room. The murmurs grew louder, and before long, Ilana's eyes met those of the people who had supported her father, and she saw something new in their gazes, doubt. For years, they had followed her father, obeyed his every command, and now, they were faced with a new, untested leader. They had no reason to trust her, not yet. Ilana knew this would take time, but she wasn't afraid. She had the strength to carry on, and she would prove herself. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations, as Ilana worked to consolidate her power. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed the support of the people, the military, and the powerful factions that had been loyal to her father. Jackson was there every step of the way, offering advice, his calm presence a stabilizing force. "Patience is your greatest ally," he reminded her. "Trust that the people will see the changes you bring, but you must show them that you are capable of leading them into that future." Ilana took his words to heart. As the days passed, she continued to meet with the empire's leaders, gaining their trust one by one. Slowly, the tides began to turn. Many of her father's former allies came to realize that she was not the child they had once dismissed, but a force in her own right. And as more people began to see the potential in her leadership, the pieces of the empire began to fall into place. By the time the next public council was called, Ilana felt the confidence she had once lacked. She had earned her place, and the people were starting to see that she was more than capable of leading them. Her vision for the future was becoming clearer with every passing day. And as she stood in front of her people once again, she knew that the journey she had started was far from over. It had only just begun. Ilana stood at the balcony of the palace, looking out over the sprawling empire she was beginning to shape with her own hands. The challenges she had faced, the obstacles that seemed insurmountable only months ago, had finally begun to settle into a rhythm. The people were beginning to believe in her, and she could feel the weight of their hopes pressing down on her. But this time, she embraced it. She had worked tirelessly to prove that she was more than just the daughter of Lord Cravar, that she was a leader in her own right, and with every passing day, she was earning the respect of those who had once doubted her. Her father's resignation had been the catalyst for change, but it was Ilana's actions, her vision, and her unwavering resolve that were transforming the empire. She knew that nothing was ever truly certain in the world of power, that the forces of opposition would always be lurking just beyond the horizon. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. "You're doing well," Jackson said as he approached from behind, his voice soft yet filled with the same strength that had seen her through the darkest times. He had become more than just an ally. He had become her closest confidant, the one person she trusted with her heart and her ambitions. "The empire is changing, but it's not just because of your decisions. It's because of the way you're leading," he continued, his words steady and sure. Ilana turned to face him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said quietly, her gaze meeting his. "You believed in me when no one else did." Jackson smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "I've always believed in you, Ilana. And now, the rest of the empire is starting to see what I saw all along." There was a moment of silence between them, a quiet understanding that passed in the stillness of the room. Ilana knew that the road ahead would not be easy. She had already encountered her fair share of opposition, and there were many more challenges yet to come. But now, she had the strength to face them. Her leadership was no longer about proving herself to her father or anyone else. It was about building a future for the people of the empire, one where power was not defined by fear, but by compassion and unity. As they walked through the palace together, Ilana's mind began to race with new plans, new ideas. She had already made strides in securing the loyalty of the nobles, but now she needed to focus on the military. Her father's reign had been built on fear, but she knew that to truly change the empire, she would need to gain the trust of the soldiers who had served under him for so long. They had been loyal to Lord Cravar, but loyalty to the old ways would not be enough to keep them in line. Ilana would need to show them that she was different, that her leadership was not just about power, but about protecting the people, about creating a future where they could thrive. The first step in that process was a meeting with the highest-ranking military officers, the men and women who held the power to sway the tides of battle. Ilana had prepared for this meeting for weeks, gathering information, speaking with advisors, and crafting a strategy that would show her commitment to the empire's future. As she entered the war room, the officers looked up, their eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. They had heard of her rise to power, but many still doubted her ability to command the military. She had no experience in warfare, and to them, that was a weakness. But Ilana was not afraid. She had spent countless hours studying the tactics of the great military leaders of history, learning from their successes and failures, and she was ready to prove herself. "I know many of you doubt my ability to lead," Ilana began, her voice steady as she faced the officers. "You have served my father for many years, and I do not expect you to simply follow me because of my bloodline. I am here to show you that I will lead with honor, with strength, and most importantly, with the well-being of the people at heart. Together, we will protect this empire from all threats, both from within and without." There was a long silence as the officers exchanged looks, sizing her up, but Ilana stood firm. She could feel their eyes on her, but this time, it did not make her nervous. She knew she had what it took to lead. Slowly, one of the senior officers, a grizzled veteran who had served in Lord Cravar's army for decades, stood up. "You're right," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. You may not have the experience your father had, but you have something he never did. Ilana raised an eyebrow, curious. What is that? The officer met her gaze, a flicker of respect in his eyes. You have vision. You have heart. And that, more than anything, is what we need. The room was silent for a moment as the words sank in. One by one, the officers began to nod, their skepticism melting away as they saw the conviction in Ilana's eyes. By the time the meeting was over, Ilana had gained the trust of the military leaders, and with their support, her vision for the future of the empire began to take shape. But even as the seeds of change were planted, Ilana knew that her journey was far from over. There were still enemies to face, old alliances to break, and new challenges to conquer. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly ready. Ready to lead, ready to fight, ready to change the world. Ilana stood on the balcony of the palace once more, but this time, the view before her felt different. The empire, which had once been a place of oppression and fear, was now filled with promise. The winds of change were blowing, and they were stronger than ever. With the support of the military, the nobles, and the people, she had transformed from a daughter in her father's shadow into the ruler of the empire. Her heart swelled with pride, but she knew that the hardest part was yet to come. This was not the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed her successful gathering of support from the military leaders, Ilana focused on the reforms she had promised. She enacted changes that would improve the lives of the common people, establish fairer governance, and end the reign of fear that had defined her father's rule. But even as she moved forward, she knew that not everyone would welcome the changes. Old allies of Lord Cravar, still loyal to his brutal ways, began to stir, seeking to challenge her authority. They did not understand that Ilana's empire would be built on compassion, not fear. Her father's former generals and advisors still held power, and there were whispers of rebellion in the halls. But Ilana was no longer the uncertain girl she once was. With Jackson by her side, she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "They will not stop us," Jackson said one evening as they discussed the growing unrest. "You have already proven yourself. Now, you must show them that no one can undo what you've built." Ilana's resolve hardened. She knew this battle would not be won with swords alone. The true fight would be for the hearts and minds of the people. She had to show them that she was the leader they needed, the leader who would guide them into a brighter future. And so, Ilana called for a grand assembly of the people, inviting representatives from every corner of the empire to gather in the palace. It was time to address the concerns of the public and reaffirm her commitment to the future she had promised them. The day of the assembly arrived, and the palace hall was filled with the voices of the people. They came from every walk of life: farmers, merchants, soldiers, and artisans, all seeking change. Ilana stood before them, her eyes scanning the crowd. The fear, the uncertainty that had once been so prevalent in her own heart, was now gone. She was ready to lead them. "People of the empire," Ilana began, her voice strong and steady. "You have suffered under a system of fear, and I stand before you today to tell you that those days are over. The empire will no longer be ruled by oppression, by violence, or by the whims of a single man. We will build a future together, one that is fair, just, and filled with hope." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd, and Ilana felt a surge of determination. This was her moment. She was not just a ruler, she was the voice of the people. "We will establish a government that listens to you," Ilana continued. "We will ensure that your voices are heard, that your needs are met, and that no one is left behind. I will fight for every one of you, and I will lead this empire into a future where we can all thrive." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ilana felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had earned their trust, and in that moment, she knew she was not just the ruler of the empire. She was the leader it had always needed. But as the assembly ended, Ilana knew the battle was far from over. The whispers of rebellion had not vanished, and there were still those who would seek to undermine her. Lord Cravar's former allies were not easily swayed. But Ilana was not afraid. She had proven that she could stand up to her father, to the empire's old ways, and now, she would prove that she could bring about lasting change. With Jackson at her side, she set to work, forging alliances with those who shared her vision and putting her reforms into motion. The empire was changing, and so was she. As time passed, Alana's leadership grew stronger, her rule becoming a beacon of hope and progress. The empire flourished under her guidance, and the people, once divided and fearful, came together to build a new future. Alana had not only claimed her place as ruler of the empire, but she had also transformed it into a place where compassion, unity, and strength thrived. As she looked out over the city, Alana knew that her journey had only just begun. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in her life, she was confident that she was ready. Ready to lead, ready to protect, and ready to shape a future where the people, not the power, would define the empire.